prospect in 10 years? And do you understand why it kind of creeps people out a little bit?
There's what I call the creepy line, and the Google policy about a lot of these things is to get right up to the creepy line but not cross it. I would argue that implanting things in your brain is beyond the creepy line.
Mine in particular.
Yes.
What is internet anyway? What do you mean? How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
No, she can't say anything in 10 seconds or less.
Oh, Allison will be in the studio shortly.
What does it mean?
It's a giant computer network made up of started from.
Oh, I thought you were going to tell us what this was.
It's like a computer billboard.
It's not a. It's a computer billboard, but it's nationwide, and it's several universities and everything all joined together.
Right.
And others can access it.
Right.
And it's getting bigger and bigger all the time.
At the end of the 20th century, Silicon Valley industry titans like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates made a promise that would forever alter how we perceive the world.
It spans the globe like a superhighway. It is called Internet.
Suddenly you're part of a new mesh of people, programs, archives, ideas.
The personal computer and the Internet ushered humanity into the information age, laying the groundwork for unlimited innovation. At the dawn of the 21st century, there would be a new revolution. A new generation of young geniuses made a new promise beyond our wildest dreams.
The idea is that we take all the world's information and make it accessible and useful to everyone.
Limitless information, artificial intelligence, machines that would know what we wanted and would tend to our every need. The technology would be beyond our imaginations, almost like magic. Yet the concept would be as simple as a single word: search. This was the beginning of Google, and less than a decade later, Facebook. They would make a new promise to humanity. What I think so interesting about Google and Facebook is they were founded at American universities. At Stanford University, you had two students, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, decide they wanted to create the ultimate search engine for the internet. Across the country, you had, in the case of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, who was a student at Harvard, decided he wanted to create a social media platform basically to meet girls and to make friends. And hence, we got Facebook.
You'd never think that you could build this company or anything like that, right? Because, we were college students, right? And we were just building stuff because we thought it was cool.
It was all about promise. It was all about this shiny future. It was all about the free flow of information. But there was also a certain idealism behind it.
I think that a company like Google, we have the potential to make very big differences, very big positive differences in the world. And I think we also have an obligation as a consequence of that.
Facebook and Google started with a great idea and great ideals. Unfortunately, there was also a very dark side.
The goal that we went into it with wasn't to make an online community, but sort of like a mirror for the real community that existed in real life.
Google handles 65% of all internet search in the US and even more overseas.
In the early days, Google was just a search engine. All the search engine was initially was an index to what's on the internet. The internet was pretty small back then. They had a better index than other indexes that were around. Theirs was not the first search engine.
Page famously said that the point of Google is to get people onto Google and off of Google out into the open web as quickly as possible. And largely they were really successful about that. The success of Google led to, in many ways, the success of the open web and this explosive growth in startups and innovation during that period. Google had developed this incredible technology called PageRank, unveiling what was known as the back rub algorithm. And it was just leaps and bounds ahead of services like Yahoo, AltaVista, and quickly became the clear winner in the space just from a technology basis. And what PageRank does is it spiders around the internet. Instead of being a directory service like Yahoo was, it's taking pictures of web pages and analyzing the links between the web pages and using that to make some assumptions about relevance. And so if you're looking for some history of Abraham Lincoln and there's a bunch of links across the web pointing to a particular site, that must mean that this page is the quote-unquote most relevant.
Now, they had to figure out, how do we make money off this? We've got an index. How do we make money? Well, they figured out how to do that. It's pretty simple. All you do is track people's searches. Your search history is very, very informative. That's going to tell someone immediately whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you like one breakfast cereal versus another. That's going to tell you whether you're gay or straight. It's going to tell you thousands of things about a person over time because they can see what websites you're going to. And where did they go? Did they go to a porn site? Did they go to a shopping site? Did they go to a website looking up how to make bombs?
This information essentially are building blocks. They are constructing a profile of you. And that profile is real, it's detailed, it's granular, and it never goes away.
Google has more than doubled its profits in the last year selling internet advertising. But with Microsoft and Yahoo gunning for its search engine users, fortunes can quickly change.
This was really the first large-scale mechanism for targeted advertising. For example, I want to sell umbrellas. Well, Google could tell you exactly, who is looking for umbrellas because they have your search history, they know. So they could hook up the umbrella makers with people searching for umbrellas, basically send you targeted ads. That is where Google gets more than 90% of its revenue.
If you look at how they structured the company, it was structured so that the founders of the company would always have controlling shares and would always determine the direction and the future of the company. Anybody else who bought into the company was simply along for the ride in terms of making money. So there was this idealism that they said motivated them, and their corporate motto was, "Don't be evil."
When the "Don't be evil" slogan came up, it was during a meeting, I think in 2003, if I recall right. People were trying to say, well, what are Google's values? And one of the engineers who was invited to this meeting said, we could just sum it all up by just saying, "Don't be evil."
What's so interesting about this term that they were not going to be evil is they never defined what evil was. They never even gave us a sense of what it meant. But people latched onto it and sort of adopted it and trusted it because, of course, nobody wants to be associated with an evil company. So people gave the term evil their own meaning.
Even their homepage indicates to you that you're not being manipulated. And they sort of broadcast to you the idea that this was a clean, simple, reliable, honest interface, and that the company that produced it wasn't overtly nefarious in its operations. So there were no ads on the front page, for example, which was a big deal. And so everybody in that initial phase of excitement, of course, was more concerned about exploring the possibilities of the technology than concerned about the potential costs of the technology.
It was always kind of a generous thing. We're going to give you these great tools. We're going to give you these things that you can use. And then Google, so Google was saying, no, actually, we're going to keep your data and we're going to organize society. We know how to improve and optimize the world.
There were a couple trends, I think, led Google off of its path of being the place that just matched people with the best information on the web and led them off into the internet. And that was the birth of smartphones. Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone, and the rise of Facebook, and this notion that time spent on a site where users were spending lots and lots of time on Facebook became a really important metrics that advertisers were paying attention to. And so Google's response was basically to deviate from that original ethos and becoming a place where they were trying to keep people on Google.
So they very rapidly started to branch out into other areas. They were getting a lot of information from people using the search engine, but if people went directly to a website, that's bad, because now Google doesn't know that. So they developed a browser, which is now the most widely used browser in the world, Chrome. By getting people to use Chrome, they were able now to collect information about every single website you visited, whether or not you were using their search engine. But of course, even that's not enough, right? Because People do a lot of things now on their mobile devices, on their computers. Without using their browser, you want to know what people are doing even when they're not online. So Google developed an operating system, which is called Android, which on mobile devices is the dominant operating system. And Android records what we're doing even when we are not online. As soon as you connect to the internet, Android uploads to Google a complete history of where you've been that day, among many other things. It's a progression of surveillance that Google has been engaged in since the beginning. When Google develops another tool for us to use, they're doing it not to make our lives easier. They're doing it to get another source of information about us.
These are all free services, but obviously they're not, because huge, complicated machines aren't free. Your interaction with them is governed so that it will generate revenue.
And that's what Google Docs is, and that's what Google Maps is, and literally now more than 100 different platforms that Google controls. Companies that use the surveillance business model, the two biggest being Google and Facebook, they don't sell you anything. They sell you. We are the product.
Now, what Google will tell you is we're very transparent. There's a user agreement. Everybody knows that if you're going to search on Google and we're going to give you access to this free information, we need to get paid. So we're going to take your data. The problem is most people don't believe or don't want to believe that that data is going to be used to manipulate you. The commonality between Facebook and Google, even though they're different platforms, is math. They're driven by math and the ability to collect data.
You sign on, you make a profile about yourself by answering some questions, entering some information such as your concentration or major at school, contact information about phone numbers, instant messaging screen names, anything you want to tell, interests, what books you like, movies, and most importantly, who your friends are.
The founders of these companies were essentially mathematicians who understood that by collecting this information, you not only could monetize it and sell it to advertisers, but you could actually control and steer people or nudge people in the direction that you wanted them to go.
An algorithm basically comes up with how certain things should react. So for example, you give it some inputs, be it in the case of Google, you would enter in a query, a search phrase, and then certain math will make decisions on what information should be presented to you. Algorithms are used throughout the whole entire process in everyday life, everything from search engines to how cars drive.
The variables you decide, and when you have a human factor deciding what the variables are, it's going to affect the outcome.
I want you to imagine walking into a room, control room with a bunch of people, 100 people hunched over at desks with little dials, and that control room will shape the thoughts and feelings of 1 billion people. This might sound like science fiction, but this actually exists right now, today.
Our ethical presuppositions are built into the software, but our unethical presuppositions are built into the software as well. So whatever it is that motivates Google are going to be built right into the automated processes that sift our data.
I used to be in one of those control rooms. I was a design ethicist at Google, where I studied how do you ethically steer people's thoughts. Because what we don't talk about is a handful of people working at a handful of technology companies, through their choices, will steer what 1 billion people are thinking today.
What Google is essentially is a gigantic compression algorithm. And what a compression algorithm does is look at a very complex environment and simplifies it. And that's what you want when you put a term into a search engine. You want all the possibilities sifted so that you find the one that you can take action on, essentially. And so Google simplifies the world and presents the simplification to you, which is also what your perceptual systems do. And so basically we're building a giant perceptual machine that's an intermediary between us and the complex world. The problem with that is that whatever the assumptions are that Google operates under are going to be the filters that determine how the world is simplified and presented.
So when you want to find something, a term, a person, do you Google it? It's really fast, no doubt about that. But are you getting the best answers to your questions?
The algorithm that they use to show us search results, it was written for the precise purpose of doing two things which make it inherently biased. And those two things are, number one, filtering. That is to say, the algorithm has to look at all the different web pages it has in its index, and it's got billions of them, and it's got to make a selection. Let's say I type in, what's the best dog food? It has to look up all the dog foods it has in its database and all the websites associated with those dog foods. That's the filtering. But then it's got to put them into an order, and that's the ordering. So the filtering is biased because why did it pick those websites instead of the other 14 billion? And then the ordering is biased because why did it put Purina first and some other company second? It would be useless for us unless it was biased. That's precisely what we want. We want it to be biased. So the problem comes in, obviously, when we're not talking about dog foods, but when we're talking about things like electricity.